Clara Win died with a noose around her neck, but when the sun set, she walked back into town barefoot, holding a shotgun, and every man who helped hang her started whispering the same word: ghost. Devil's Bluff squatted low in the valley, a collection of sun-baked buildings clinging to the dusty earth like ticks on a dog. The year was 1888, and life here was a gamble. Gold had long since dried up, leaving behind only the desperate, the ruthless, and those too stubborn to leave. The town's main street, wider than most, served as both thoroughfare and gallows stage. The air hung thick with the smell of stale beer, dust, and simmering resentment. Buildings leaned on each other for support, mirroring the townsfolk's codependent relationship built on secrets and shared sins. To the east, jagged peaks clawed at the sky, offering no comfort, only a stark reminder of the unforgiving landscape. Water was scarce, hope even scarcer. The only law was the word of Sheriff Clem, a man whose belly strained against his starched shirt and whose eyes held the glint of greed. The church, a crude wooden structure, stood as a testament to the town's hypocrisy. Preacher Josiah, a man of fire and brimstone sermons, held sway over the fearful, his pronouncements often conveniently aligning with the sheriff's desires. Devil's Bluff was a pressure cooker, a place where tensions simmered just below the surface. Everyone had a secret, a reason to look over their shoulder. They were all bound together by the unspoken knowledge of what they had done and what they were capable of doing. And soon they would all be forced to confront their collective guilt with the return of Clara Win. A name whispered with dread and disbelief. The woman they watched die, the woman who would soon return. The sun, a malevolent eye in the pale morning sky, cast long, distorted shadows across Devil's Bluff. A hush fell over the town, a silence broken only by the creaking of the gallows and the rustling of the wind. Every window was filled, every rooftop occupied. They had all come to witness the end of Clara Win. Clara stood on the wooden platform, her bare feet exposed to the rough planks. Her dress, a simple cotton shift, was the only splash of color against the drab backdrop. Her hands were bound, but her head was held high. There was no fear in her eyes, only a deep, unsettling sadness. Sheriff Clem, his face flushed with a mixture of self-importance and discomfort, read the charges in a droning voice, his words echoing through the silent street. Murder, theft, conspiracy. All lies whispered by those who feared her. Preacher Josiah offered a final prayer, his words hollow and insincere. He spoke of redemption and forgiveness, but his gaze never met Clara's. He knew, as they all did, that she was innocent. The noose was placed around Clara's neck, the coarse rope biting into her skin. The hangman, a shadowy figure shrouded in black, adjusted the knot with practiced ease. Clara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of fear, but of sorrow for the injustice that had befallen her and for the town that had condemned her. The lever creaked, the platform dropped, Clara Win fell. The sun had dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Shadows lengthened, swallowing Devil's Bluff in a cloak of twilight. The town, usually bustling with evening activity, was eerily quiet. A palpable tension hung in the air, thicker than the dust. The townsfolk, though relieved that the grim spectacle of the morning was over, found no peace. They gathered in hushed whispers, their eyes darting nervously towards the gallows, as if expecting a phantom to swing from its beam. Inside the saloon, Sheriff Clem nursed a glass of whiskey, his face etched with worry. He kept replaying the morning's events in his mind, searching for any sign, any clue that could explain the unease that gnawed at him. Preacher Josiah sat alone in his church, the flickering candlelight casting grotesque shadows on the walls. He couldn't shake the image of Clara's tear, the silent accusation in her eyes. Then she appeared. A figure emerged from the deepening shadows at the edge of town. Barefoot, her dress torn and stained, she walked with a slow, deliberate purpose. A shotgun rested casually across her shoulder. It was Clara Win. A collective gasp swept through the town. Whispers turned to shouts of disbelief and terror. Had they not seen her die? Had they not watched her body hang lifeless from the gallows? Clara continued her advance, her gaze fixed on the saloon. The silence returned, heavier than before, broken only by the rhythmic thud of her bare feet on the dusty ground. She was back, and Devil's Bluff would never be the same. The collective gasp that escaped the townsfolk hung in the air, thick with disbelief and terror. Little Timmy, perched on his father's shoulders, pointed a trembling finger. "Pa, is that a ghost?" Martha, the baker's wife, clutched her rosary, muttering frantic prayers. Old man Hemlock, who swore he'd seen it all in his 80 years, simply stared, his mouth agape, his eyes wide with a fear he hadn't felt since facing down a grizzly bear. Inside the saloon, Sheriff Clem slammed his whiskey glass on the counter, the amber liquid sloshing over the rim. His hand instinctively reached for his gun, but he hesitated. Could a bullet harm a ghost? Glanced at Preacher Josiah, who had stumbled in, his face ashen. The preacher's lips moved silently, his eyes fixed on Clara as she approached. Witchcraft, someone screamed from the crowd. The word spread like wildfire, fueling the growing panic. Some began to flee, scrambling to escape the perceived supernatural threat. Others stood frozen, paralyzed by fear and morbid curiosity. Even the dogs, usually quick to bark at strangers, remained silent, whimpering and cowering at their owner's feet. The horses in the stable stamped nervously, their eyes rolling in their sockets. Clara didn't break her stride. She moved with an unsettling grace, her bare feet making no sound on the dusty street. The shotgun across her shoulder seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. She was a specter, a phantom, a walking nightmare, or perhaps something far more dangerous, something that had returned to settle a score. Whatever she was, Devil's Bluff was about to find out. Sheriff Clem, despite his outward show of authority, felt a cold dread grip his heart. He knew Clara's hanging was a sham, a means to silence her before she exposed his dealings with the railroad. Now the past he tried to bury had returned, and he feared the consequences more than any ghost. He gripped his gun tighter, sweat beading on his forehead. Preacher Josiah, usually so confident in his sermons, trembled like a leaf. He had convinced himself that condemning Clara was God's will, a necessary sacrifice for the good of the town. But seeing her again, alive and filled with an unsettling resolve, shattered his carefully constructed justifications. Guilt gnawed at his soul. Other townsfolk reacted in various ways. Mary, the saloon girl who had secretly been Clara's friend, felt a surge of hope amidst the fear. Could Clara expose the truth and bring justice to Devil's Bluff? Hank the blacksmith, a member of the jury that convicted Clara, felt a prick of conscience. He had voted guilty under pressure from the sheriff, and now the weight of his decision threatened to crush him. He avoided eye contact with everyone, his hands clammy. Even those who had actively participated in Clara's downfall were not immune to the growing unease. They whispered among themselves, their voices laced with paranoia, each suspecting the other of betrayal. Devil's Bluff was a town built on lies, and Clara's return threatened to topple it all. The fear was palpable, a suffocating blanket smothering any semblance of normalcy. While the town dissolved into chaos, Clara remained an island of serenity. Her face was devoid of any emotion, no anger, no triumph, no fear, only a quiet, unwavering focus. It was this unnerving calmness that amplified the town's terror. A screaming, vengeful ghost they could understand, but this was something else entirely. She didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't even acknowledge the terrified faces around her. Her eyes, the same eyes that had shed a single tear on the gallows, were now like chips of flint, cold and hard. They scanned the crowd, seemingly searching for something or someone. Each step she took was deliberate, measured. The shotgun, usually a symbol of aggression, seemed more like an extension of her will, a tool she would use with ruthless efficiency. The way she carried it, casually yet confidently, spoke volumes. The contrast between the town's hysteria and Clara's composure was stark. They were reacting, she was acting. They were driven by fear, she was driven by something else, something deeper, something that they couldn't comprehend. Was it revenge that fueled her, or was it justice she sought? Perhaps it was something darker, a force born of the injustice she had suffered, a force that would consume Devil's Bluff and leave nothing but ashes in its wake. The townsfolk could only watch and wait, their fear growing with each silent step she took. Her calmness was a promise, a guarantee that whatever was coming would be far more terrifying than anything they could imagine. Clara stopped in front of Silas's general store, the only shop in Devil's Bluff that sold anything of value. Silas, a wiry man with a nervous twitch, was a member of the jury that had condemned her. He stood behind the counter, his face pale and slick with sweat, pretending to busy himself with rearranging bolts of fabric. Clara entered, the bell above the door jingling eerily in the silent store. Silas didn't look up. "Silas," Clara said, her voice a low, almost hypnotic murmur. He flinched, nearly dropping a roll of calico. He finally looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "Ciel, Clara, but we saw you die." "Did you?" Clara asked, her voice still calm. She slowly raised the shotgun, not pointing it directly at him but making its presence known. "Tell me, Silas, why did you lie on the stand?" Silas stammered, I don't know what you're talking about. "The gold, Silas, the gold that disappeared from my claim. You knew Sheriff Clem stole it, didn't you? You saw him, didn't you?" Silas's eyes darted around the store, searching for an escape. I can't say anything. He'll kill me." "He'll kill you anyway, Silas. He can't let you live knowing what you know. But maybe, just maybe, if you tell the truth, I can protect you." Clara's words hung in the air, a promise and a threat intertwined. Silas's resolve crumbled. He began to sob, confessing everything he knew about Sheriff Clem's scheme, revealing the first crack in the carefully constructed lies that held Devil's Bluff together. The conspiracy had begun. As Silas sobbed, a fleeting image flashed through Clara's mind, a younger version of herself, laughing, her face radiant with the golden light of the setting sun, standing beside a newly dug mine shaft. The air was filled with the sound of rushing water, a promise of riches to come. Then the image shattered, replaced by another, rough hands shoving her against a wall, the smell of cheap whiskey and sweat filling her nostrils. Sheriff Clem's face loomed above her, his eyes filled with a cold, possessive hunger. "That gold is mine, Clara, you understand." Another fragment, a heated argument in the town square, her voice rising in defiance as she accused Sheriff Clem of corruption. The faces of the townsfolk blurred, their expressions a mixture of fear and animosity. Preacher Josiah's voice boomed, accusing her of being a troublemaker, a threat to the town's stability. And then the most chilling image of all, the glint of metal in the darkness, a sharp pain in her side, and the sensation of falling into a black abyss. These fragments, fleeting and disjointed, offered glimpses into Clara's past, hints of the events that led to her downfall. They revealed the greed, the betrayal, and the violence that had consumed Devil's Bluff. But they were just pieces of a puzzle, fragments of a truth that remained shrouded in mystery. The full picture remained elusive, hidden behind layers of lies and deception. Each flashback was a breadcrumb leading Clara and perhaps the town closer to a reckoning. The suspense grew. Sheriff Clem, shaken by Silas's confession and Clara's unnerving presence, knew he had to act fast. He sought out Preacher Josiah, their alliance forged in greed and maintained by fear. "We need to control this," Clem growled, his voice tight with anxiety, "before she turns the whole town against us." Preacher Josiah, regaining some of his composure, nodded grimly. "We must remind them of the truth, Clem, of the evil she represents." They began their campaign, subtly at first, spreading rumors and half-truths. Clem whispered to the townsfolk about Clara being in league with dark forces, a witch who had cheated death through unholy means. He reminded them of the evidence presented at the trial, conveniently omitting the fact that he had fabricated most of it. Josiah, from his pulpit, delivered fire and brimstone sermons, condemning Clara as a demon sent to test their faith. He spoke of divine justice and the importance of obedience to authority, conveniently equating his authority with God's. He painted Clara as a dangerous outsider, a threat to their way of life. They targeted the most vulnerable members of the community, the fearful, the superstitious, and those who had the most to lose if the truth came out. They played on their fears, manipulating them into believing that Clara was a danger to them all. Their efforts began to take hold. The whispers of fear grew louder, the looks of suspicion more pronounced. The town, once wavering, began to solidify against Clara, their paranoia fueled by the sheriff and the preacher's lies. The battle for the narrative had begun. Despite the sheriff and preacher's efforts, their control over Devil's Bluff began to weaken. Silas's confession, whispered from ear to ear, sowed seeds of doubt. The more they tried to demonize Clara, the more some people began to question the official narrative. Mary, the saloon girl, emboldened by Clara's return, started to openly challenge the lies. She reminded people of Clara's kindness, her generosity, and her unwavering honesty. She spoke of the sheriff's greed and the preacher's hypocrisy. Hank, the blacksmith, racked with guilt, started to help those who were questioning the verdict, providing them with subtle hints and clues that undermined the sheriff's version of events. He couldn't undo what he had done, but he could try to make amends. But others clung to their established beliefs, their fear outweighing their sense of justice. They ostracized those who dared to question the sheriff and the preacher, clinging to the familiar lies for comfort and security. Families were torn apart, friendships shattered. The town was divided, suspicion and mistrust poisoning the air. Some secretly left food on Clara's doorstep. Some openly spat on the ground where she had walked. Devil's Bluff was no longer a unified community, but a fractured collection of individuals, each grappling with their own conscience and their own fears. The cracks in the town's foundation were widening, threatening to bring the whole structure crashing down. Clara's presence had become a catalyst, forcing them to confront the darkness that had always lurked beneath the surface. The reckoning was coming. The church doors were locked, the windows shuttered, but Clara knew preacher Josiah was inside. She could feel his fear, a palpable energy radiating from the building. She kicked the door open, the wood splintering with a loud crack that echoed through the silent town. Josiah was kneeling at the altar, his face buried in his hands, his body shaking. He didn't look up when Clara entered. "Josiah," Clara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Why did you condemn me?" He flinched but remained kneeling. I did what was right for the good of the town." "The good of the town, or the good of Sheriff Clem's pockets?" Clara stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "You knew I was innocent, you knew he stole my gold, yet you stood by and let me hang." Josiah began to sob, his body convulsing. "I had no choice. He threatened me. He threatened my family. And so you sacrificed me. You, a man of God, sacrificed an innocent woman to save yourself." Clara's words were like ice, each one a sharp, piercing shard. She raised the shotgun, pointing it not at Josiah's body, but at the stained glass window depicting Jesus on the cross. "Tell me, Josiah, what would Jesus do?" The question shattered Josiah. He looked up, his eyes filled with a raw, primal terror. The carefully constructed facade of piety and righteousness crumbled, revealing the broken, cowardly man beneath. He began to scream, incoherent words tumbling from his lips, his mind unraveling under the weight of his guilt. Clara watched him, unmoved. She had exposed his hypocrisy, stripped him bare, and left him to face the consequences of his actions. The preacher was broken. The reckoning had begun. As the broken preacher Josiah was led away, babbling incoherently, Clara turned her attention to Sheriff Clem. She knew she needed more than just Silas's confession and Josiah's breakdown. She needed concrete proof. She walked towards the sheriff's office, a small, dilapidated building next to the saloon. Clem was inside, pacing nervously, his face pale and drawn. Clara didn't bother knocking. She kicked the door open, the sound echoing through the silent street. Clem whirled around, his hand reaching for his gun. "Looking for something, Clem?" Clara asked, her voice calm and steady. She held up a small, leather-bound ledger. "I believe this belongs to you." Clem's eyes widened in horror. The ledger contained a detailed record of his illegal dealings with the railroad, his bribes, and his share of the gold stolen from Clara's claim. It was the one piece of evidence he thought he had destroyed. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "Let's just say I have my sources," Clara replied, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. She knew Mary, the saloon girl, had secretly retrieved the ledger from Clem's office while he was distracted by Josiah's outburst. Clara tossed the ledger onto the desk. "I think the people of Devil's Bluff would be very interested in reading this, don't you?" Clem knew he was cornered. The ledger was undeniable proof of his corruption. His authority, already weakened, was now crumbling completely. The town, witnessing the confrontation, murmured with growing anger. Their sheriff, their protector, was a thief and a liar. The scales were tipping. The reckoning was at hand. Clem, his face contorted with rage and desperation, knew his time was up. The ledger was a death sentence. He had to silence Clara permanently. "You think you've won, Clara?" He snarled, his hand gripping the butt of his revolver. "You think you can just waltz back in here and destroy everything I've built?" He lunged forward, drawing his gun and firing a shot. The bullet whizzed past Clara's head, shattering a window behind her. The town gasped. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Clara didn't flinch. Her eyes remained fixed on Clem, her expression unchanged. She calmly raised her shotgun, the movement smooth and practiced. Clem fired again and again, the shots echoing through the town. Clara dodged each bullet with an almost supernatural agility, her bare feet moving silently on the wooden floor. He was out of bullets, his gun clicked empty. He threw the gun at her, a futile gesture of defiance. Clara sidestepped it effortlessly. "It's over, Clem," she said, her voice calm and steady. Your lies are exposed, your power is gone. Clem, defeated and desperate, charged at Clara, his hands outstretched, his face a mask of fury. He would silence her one way or another. He would rather die than face the consequences of his actions. The reckoning would be bloody. The town held its breath. Every eye was fixed on the doorway of the sheriff's office, watching as Clem charged towards Clara, a man possessed. Clara stood her ground, her shotgun still resting casually against her shoulder. She waited until Clem was almost upon her, his face inches from hers, his hands reaching for her throat. Then with lightning speed she swung the shotgun, the butt connecting with Clem's jaw with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The silence that followed was deafening. The townspeople stared, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. The reign of Sheriff Clem was over, but the showdown wasn't over. Clara raised the shotgun, aiming it not at Clem's prone body, but at the sky. She fired a single shot, the sound echoing through the valley, a signal, a declaration. Suddenly the town erupted in chaos. Men and women, emboldened by Clara's actions and armed with rifles and shotguns, emerged from their homes and businesses. They surrounded the sheriff's office, their faces grim, their eyes filled with determination. The reckoning had begun, not just for Sheriff Clem, but for all those who had profited from the corruption and injustice that had plagued Devil's Bluff for so long. Clara lowered her shotgun, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the townspeople. Her calmness was gone, replaced by a fierce determination. The town held its breath, waiting for her command, waiting to see what kind of justice or revenge Clara Win would deliver. Clara stepped forward, her voice ringing out clear and strong. You all saw what happened here. You all know that Sheriff Clem is a liar and a thief. She paused, letting her words sink in. But you don't know the whole story. You don't know why he wanted me dead. She recounted everything, starting with her discovery of a rich vein of gold on her claim. She explained how Sheriff Clem had tried to intimidate her, to force her to sell her claim for a pittance. She revealed how she had refused, vowing to expose his dealings with the railroad, a deal that would rob the town of its land and resources. She told them how Clem had framed her for murder, using false evidence and coerced testimony. She revealed how Preacher Josiah had willingly participated in the charade, condemning her in the name of God while knowing full well she was innocent. She explained the glint of metal, the pain, the fall. She hadn't died that night. She had been left for dead, but she had survived, nursed back to health by a traveling Native American woman who understood the ways of the land and the power of healing. She showed them the scars, both physical and emotional, that Clem and Josiah had inflicted upon her. They thought they could silence me, she said, her voice trembling with anger. They thought they could bury the truth, but they were wrong. The townspeople listened in stunned silence, their faces etched with shame and disbelief. The full extent of the corruption and lies that had festered in Devil's Bluff was finally exposed. The heart of darkness had been laid bare. The reckoning was unavoidable. The town waited, holding its breath. Clara held the shotgun loosely in her hand, but her gaze was sharp, piercing. The power was hers. She could unleash a torrent of vengeance, washing away the corruption in a tide of blood, or she could choose a different path. She looked at Sheriff Clem, lying unconscious on the ground. She could kill him, end his life, and satisfy the burning desire for revenge that had sustained her for so long. But would that truly bring her peace? She looked at Preacher Josiah, huddled in the corner of the church, his mind shattered. He was already a broken man, consumed by his guilt. What good would come from further punishment? She looked at the faces of the townspeople, some filled with remorse, others with fear, still others with a glimmer of hope. They had been complicit in her downfall, but they were also victims of Clem and Josiah's corruption. Did they deserve to suffer for the sins of their leaders? Clara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She thought of the Native American woman who had saved her life, who had taught her the importance of forgiveness and the power of healing. She opened her eyes, her gaze resolute. "We will have justice," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "But we will not resort to violence. We will not become the monsters they wanted us to be." She outlined her plan, a fair trial overseen by an impartial judge from outside Devil's Bluff. The ledger would be presented as evidence, and all those who had participated in the conspiracy would be held accountable. The gold would be returned to the town, used to rebuild what Clem and Josiah had destroyed. The reckoning would be just. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Sheriff Clem and Preacher Josiah were taken into custody, awaiting trial. An impartial judge arrived from a neighboring town, and the process of uncovering the full extent of the corruption began. The ledger revealed a web of deceit that reached far beyond Devil's Bluff, implicating powerful figures in the railroad company and the territorial government. The town, once isolated and forgotten, became the center of a major scandal. The trial was a spectacle, drawing reporters and onlookers from far and wide. The truth was laid bare, and those who had participated in the conspiracy were held accountable. Some were imprisoned, others were fined, and all were forever marked by their involvement in the events that had transpired in Devil's Bluff. The gold was recovered and used to rebuild the town. The schoolhouse was repaired, the streets were paved, and a new church was built, one dedicated to justice and compassion rather than fear and hypocrisy. Devil's Bluff was forever changed. The old ways were gone, replaced by a new sense of community and a commitment to honesty and fairness. The town had faced its darkest demons and emerged, scarred but stronger, on the other side. Clara Win became a legend, a symbol of courage, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. She remained in Devil's Bluff, helping to guide the town through its transformation. She never forgot the injustice she had suffered, but she refused to let it define her. She had chosen justice over revenge, and in doing so, she had saved not only herself but also the soul of Devil's Bluff. The reckoning was complete, the end.